from them.
Great.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Damian Woetzel. I'm the director of the Aspen Institute Arts Programs and a member of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. Great to have such a full house here to talk about the Turnaround Arts Initiative. We're going to have a conversation today with Kaya Henderson, the Chancellor of the DC schools, one of which her schools is a project of this Turnaround Arts Initiative, and the principal of that school is actually in the house as well. Where's Patrick? Right over there, Patrick Pope. And on my right is Rachel Goslins, the Executive Director of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities, who has been working on this for quite some time and working on how the arts and humanities intersect with society most effectively over the last several years. So welcome, Rachel and Kaya. Thank you. So, Rachel, I thought we'd start just simply by, you and I talk for a moment about, the goals of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities and how we came to this place. I should also recognize Julius Janikowski, Chairman of the FCC, and also related to, yes, Rachel. So, Julius, good to have you with us here today. So Rachel, when we began our work, and I should say when you began your work because you predate the membership, so to speak, what was the goal in your mind as regards education that actually has been the through line maybe to get us here?
So while I shortly predate the committee, I was appointed before the whole committee was sworn in. This emphasis on arts education, which has developed under this administration, really did come from both the White House. The First Lady is the honorary but fairly active chair of the committee, and the membership of the committee. When we were all sworn in and sat down around a table and started talking about what we wanted to be as a signature kind of focus and legacy of this President's Committee. I should back up for a moment. The committee actually was created in 1982 by President Reagan and has been around since then, and its mandate is to advise the White House on cultural issues and to coordinate between agencies and the public and private sector in special projects in the arts and humanities. So it was incredibly fortunate we came into the committee membership, which is made of partially of public officials whose departments or agencies have a role in culture, including the chair of the Endowment for the Arts and the Endowment for the Humanities, the secretary of the Smithsonian, the Librarian of Congress, but also the Secretary of Education, Secretary of State. So as we put those groups together, and then our private members, which are appointed by each administration, this administration has gifted this committee with an incredibly high percentage of visionary, committed, working artists. Really, it's the highest percentage of any President's Committee since it was created, and we are fortunate to have folks like Yo-Yo Ma and Chuck Close and Damian Woetzel, Jill Udall, who's here with us today, Forrest Whitaker, Kerry Washington, Sarah Jessica Parker, Tom Main, Jhumpa Lahiri, just amazing artists who have also sort of demonstrated commitment to the arts and to policy in their private lives. Several of those folks came in with a strong background in arts education. Both Yo-Yo and Chuck Close had been involved in starting arts education organizations in their personal lives. And so we came in knowing that arts education was going to be important and starting to think about it. And the more we looked into it, we realized that on a broader scale, this country is engaged in a national conversation about how to fix education, how to fix failing schools, how to elevate best practices. And there's a lot of energy and investment in amazing people like Kaya who are at the forefront of that effort. But arts education had been really marginalized from that conversation and was seen as something that was, of course good for kids, and it's hard to find somebody who would think it was a bad thing for kids to have. But very few people felt that it was critical or that it was that it had a seat at this larger table about what we can do to change the way we reach and teach our children. So the more we looked into this, the more we realized that here was really an opportunity for the strengths of this committee. We don't have a gigantic budget. We're not a grant-making agency, but we have a huge platform because of our proximity and to the White House and our access to these federal officials and their engagement on the committee, and then the membership, the private membership. So our ability to try and elevate this issue and help the field demonstrate more tangible connections between arts education writ small and education writ large was something we zeroed in on early in our term. We spent 2 years putting out the first federal report on arts education in over a decade called Reinvesting in Arts Education, Winning America's Future Through Creative Schools. And out of that issued a set of conclusions and recommendations. This was in almost exactly a year ago in May of 2011. The next piece for us, as we sat down around the table, and Damian, you were actually really a huge proponent of this, is how do we get our hands dirty? How can we actually demonstrate in a concrete way all of this, decades of research of linking efficacy in arts education to efficacy in academic success? And out of that, and in conversations with the White House and the Department of Education, came this idea for Turnaround Arts and a model program to specifically look at the role, if any, of the arts in high poverty, chronically underperforming schools. And how could we slice that issue off from all of the other arguments that are made about arts education and find a way to really target, to target the role of the arts in these very troubled schools.
Yeah, I think that from when we first convened, all the members, the priority for us was how can we help? How can the arts be a part of solutions? It wasn't. It really wasn't help the arts, which is more traditional that you might think. Like how are we going to get helped? It was really about what can we do. And we have arms, straddling economics issues and cultural diplomacy issues and advocacy, but education, I think, was the one that touched most people the strongest. Part of that was because so many of the members actually had engaged in it in some way, shape, or form. Yo-Yo and I worked together in New York. We've done programs in Chicago and in LA, so it's just very natural. Like, how can we blow this out? How can we show that this is helping? So when this opportunity first came, first of all, we wanted to do everything. So, we were like, let's do it all, But the idea to get our hands dirty is exactly right. So this was a moment to hopefully be of service, to show that, everything that we're saying, that the report showed, that the recommendations were made in the spirit of this will help, and this is our opportunity. So maybe we should turn to Kaya, since this was brought to you as a solution, right? As a potential solution. And where do you think? What do you think in basic terms? Like, what can they do? What can they not do?
Well, I think the research is clear on the connection between the arts and academics, so I won't belabor that point. In fact, the first time that Rachel and I sat down and had breakfast, she was like, well, let me explain to you why, and I was like, let's move on to second order things, right? I'm there. I had the benefit of going to an arts integration elementary school. I started playing the violin in 3rd grade. I danced. I did ballet and gymnastics and jazz at school. I was part of the chorus. We also had a band. We did the sets in art classes. We did the sets for our shows. All of our learning was thematic. And so I experienced an arts integrated education in a high poverty neighborhood in New York, and saw the transformative effect that it had, not just on me, but on my colleagues, around our academic success, our motivation, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have to convince me, first of all, that it's critical to providing a world-class education for our young people. But when I think about what it takes then to move that from idea to reality, it actually takes significant political courage and will, because not everybody understands the importance of the arts in providing a well-rounded education. And so as you see across the country, you see budgets being cut and the arts affected disproportionately. It takes I think some creativity in terms of how you think about doing what you do. In school districts, we are boxed in by certain constraints, scheduling constraints. There's not enough time to do the arts. Professional development constraints, because in many ed schools you're not taught how to integrate the arts while you're being trained to teach. And so and then leadership. I think in order for it to happen at the school level, you need to ensure that leaders are the right people and have the right resources and support to carry out this agenda. And then I think partners are another key part of the equation. In fact, I would say that whereas the district has not been as explicit, I think, as we are right now in terms of a commitment to the arts writ large across the district, beyond, you know, pockets of arts excellence, I think partners here in the district, arts partners, have carried the work when the district wasn't willing to make the kind of commitment that is necessary, right? One of my first meetings when I was the deputy chancellor, and I was responsible not just for human capital but for partnerships, was a meeting with the folks at the Washington Performing Arts Society. And they came and they said to me, we want to start a program called Capital Jazz. And I said, great, tell me about it. And they said, we want to bring in artists, performing artists, to come in and work with kids in your toughest middle schools. And I'm like, yes, this is great. And we want to teach them the history of jazz and instrumentation, and we want to get kids playing, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, fabulous. How much is it going to cost me? And they said, well, it is free. We're willing to bring it to, you know, 4 schools for free. And I said, okay, so what do you need from me? And they said, well, we need your permission, because for 4 or 5 years we've been trying to get this program off the ground and nobody in the district would say yes. And I was like, yes. And that partnership has had tremendous results from us, with us, from 4 schools initially to now 7 or 8 middle schools. It has spawned other programs, Capital Strings, which is an orchestral program, Capital Voices, which is a choral program, and Capital Dance at schools all across the city. And they're reaching some, like, sick proportion of my kids, like 45 or 50% of the young people in elementary schools are being reached by programs through our partners. So having the political will to do the work once you realize how important this is, leveraging partners in the right way to help with this work, and then putting our money where our mouth is very important. I just want to sort of say one other thing. You'll have the opportunity to hear from him because he's the real star. But Mr. Pope is a veteran DCPS principal, has done amazing things in schools all across this city, and was successfully leading a high-performing middle school over in Northwest DC with an arts focus. And he had come into the central office to do some arts planning work for us. And when I had the opportunity at the end of that engagement to put him back into a school, I had tons of pressure to put him back into the school that he previously was at. But I've known him for a really long time. In fact, when I was the executive director of Teach for America DC, he was one of the principals that we partnered with early on. He had a heart for the young teachers and was willing to mentor and develop them, and so took a lot of our folks. And I said, you know, Mr. Pope, what do you think about going to the other side of town, where kids who will likely never get the kind of arts exposure that you and I both know is critical and important, where they need a shot? And he said, I'd be happy to go. And took over the post at Savoy Elementary School and has made magic happen in a short amount of time, and thanks to the commission is going to be able to extend this arts integration work in a very significant way in one of our most challenging schools and neighborhoods in the city.
That's a logical segue to Mr. Pope, and my question really, from the practitioner point of view, having been in elementary schools, where, what's the problem? How does it? Where do the tires stop short? I mean, is it opportunity cost, the time issues, how do you juggle this? And not specific to this initiative, probably, but just in general in your experience.
Well, first of all, I want to say again, none of this happens without the leadership from even further up, and without the support of the chancellor, I wouldn't be doing any of what we're able to do right now. So I mean, you have to be clear about that. When Chancellor Henderson says we've got to have the right support and the right resources, she's hit it on the head. But she also knows that it takes someone who actually can juggle a little bit and keep things really moving. We sometimes we work for a city agency, a very large city agency. We have lots of rules and regulations on things like procurement and hiring, and for good reasons. But those are never the reasons not to be doing what we do. So for me, the rubber never stops. It doesn't. And again, through our partnerships with unbelievable city arts education groups like WPAS, the Washington Performing Arts Society, we were able to do much more than would have been able to do just through the process of hiring and writing a schedule and all that. I also believe that having taken up the challenge from Chancellor Henderson to go to a very tough school in, we call them, I guess, neighborhoods of opportunity now, or where there's low opportunity, and where kids have failed, and the school is kind of considered a failing school. The turnaround, moniker is not really a positive one for under the federal side. It means that there's consecutive years of low performance. But in the year we've been there, we have found such richness and such intensity and such interest to do even more. So we feel like we've set the stage for building out the program even further. And we were given an opportunity to write another grant proposal for this year, which was announced Friday, and it's going to allow us to absolutely double the capacity of the arts programming we do, with some very innovative scheduling, a Saturday academy. We have something called the Strategic Summer School, which we're going to do next year, and arts will be absolutely hand in glove with everything we do. And in closing, I want to say, our partnerships have been able to help us reach, but also, because I have a little bit of experience in administration, I've found out that there are unbelievably talented teachers and artists and musicians and performers who want also to spend time, work with kids. So we have our regular staff, we have our professional staff coming in, we have our partnership staff coming in, and it's a very full day. We've kind of eliminated recess, but don't tell the kids that.
Rachel?
Yeah, I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about our selection process for Turnaround Arts as a way of really circling back to the extraordinary vision and capacity of Kaya and Patrick. When we set out to do this, we knew we wanted to do something. As I said, we don't have a large budget, we don't get money from Congress, so we knew we had to look for opportunities to leverage. And the White House and the Department of Education really urged us to focus on something called the School Improvement Grant Program, which is a large grant program to the U.S. Department of Education that focuses on the lowest performing 5% of schools in the country and gives them a 3-year kind of influx of significant resources in return for signing on to some pretty significant structural reforms. So there are 1,200 schools across the country that are part of the School Improvement Program through the Department of Education, and they encouraged us to think about ways to find schools within that group who had access to sort of more resources than other schools might, and who were, by definition, the most challenged schools in the country. I mean, this is really these schools are ground zero in a lot of ways for the educational reform movement. And so, together with the Department of Education, we reached out to all of the state school improvement grant offices and said, we're putting together this program which is going to bring intensive arts education resources, expertise, professional development, and professional artists into SIG schools. And we'd like you to nominate elementary or middle schools with strong principals who already kind of get it, who have expressed an interest or a vision for using the arts as part of their toolkit, not something they're going to do after they fix all their problems, but as a way to fix their problems. And it was a little bit of a flyer because we didn't know whether we would get anything back. It's not like there are a lot of principals out there that inherit, a school that's been the lowest performing school in their state for several years, which is not Savoy but some of our other schools, and violence problems, drug problems, attendance problems, and say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to fire my security guards and bring in dance and music and arts teachers. So we really didn't know whether we were going to get any nominations back, and we were incredibly gratified. We got nominations from 12 states, a host of really great schools, and we went out and did site visits to 14 different districts before settling on our 8 Turnaround Arts schools and districts. And what was amazing is finding this hardy group of principals, no pun intended, like Principal Pope, who really got it, who not only volunteered to take on these incredibly challenging schools, but had a vision for how they were going to use the arts to change the way the students felt when they walked through that door their first year back. And so finding principals like Principal Pope was a huge part of the puzzle, but then we also had to look at the district, because we couldn't go, part of the reason we're doing this is to encourage best practices and scaling of this model, and we also wanted to go into schools where they had district support. And we went to some schools that had really strong principals, but didn't have as much support from their district, or didn't have leaders in the district who really got it. And so it was where we found that marriage of really strong district leadership and incredibly strong school leadership that we were able to pick these schools that we're working in, and Savoy is just such a great example of that.
Well, and it's a real cross-section even within that, so that at the end of all this, and there's a big piece of this that you can maybe explain at some point about the research component. This is all going to be monitored by Booz Allen consistently throughout. So at the end of this, it's going to be documented how it worked, where it worked best, how it actually was effective, and what wasn't effective as well, because not all stories are happy. But the schools that are involved here range from a school on an Indian reservation in Montana to Principal Pope's school, to a school in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I mean, there's a huge range. But I will say one thing, picking up on the willingness of the arts community is huge in this. One of the things that we discussed from the members of the committee who have adopted schools, which we'll explain in a minute, was when it was announced, the feedback we got from the arts community in general were just a slew of emails of, how can we help? I mean, I had Alvin Ailey writing me that morning saying, okay, we are all across the country, where do we match up? I had Celebrate the Beat, which is a version of National Dance Institute, saying, how can we help? And it's happening. They're going to go to Denver and they're going to help there. The willingness to actually be to be a part of this effort to turn around is huge. I think it's symbolic in one way, and another way it's just a model, hopefully, and we'll be able to prove it. Do you want to tell us a little more about how it's going to work?
Yeah, so I mean the details are, so we are fairly simple. We put together an amazing group of partners. It's almost entirely privately raised funds that leverage the SIG funds that are going into our schools over the 2 years we'll be working in them intensively. And several foundations, Crayola, the National Association of Music Merchants are donating art supplies and musical instruments to each of our schools. We came here to Aspen to talk to the education program here, and Ross Wiener, who's over here, who does a tremendous amount of work in the hard education field with superintendents, with principals, with teachers, is co-hosting with us a summer institute each summer for principals and teacher leaders from each of our schools to come and build a community of practice and get exposure to best practices and model teaching from some of the top arts education providers across the country, as well as build a strategic plan for their school that will take them into the next 2 years. So it's a mixture of leadership training, technical assistance. We're going to be sending professional development teams in music and in visual arts and in the other disciplines into each of our schools over the course of the year. Hosting community arts events to get the community engaged, pull the community into these schools, raise visibility for principals and districts like this one that are doing innovative, forward-looking, creative things with their schools. And then also each of our, a number of the artists on our committee have each adopted one of our schools, and so they'll be working in those schools over the course of the next 2 years, going to the school, working with the kids, doing community events there, to build morale, to sort of give a win to the school, and also to drive visibility for their efforts. So Damian will be working with Yo-Yo in our Roxbury, Massachusetts school, and then has also incredibly generously taken on Lame Deer, Montana, which is our northwestern Montana school, which is on the Cheyenne Reservation, just one of the most challenged in educational environments I've ever been in. And Damian will be working with them along with musicians from the Silk Road Ensemble over the next 2 years. There's just an incredible excitement and energy about when you bring the arts into these schools, and then it's married with the real nuts and bolts of empowering and educating their arts specialists, which are a huge piece of this puzzle. You need community organizations to come in, but you also need arts teachers and music specialists in each of these schools that have sequential curriculums that understand pedagogy, that are part of the faculty, that can be part of the creative vision for the school. So building capacity in them, supporting principals like Principal Pope and our other principals who are really going out on a limb in their communities, saying this is how I'm going to, part of how I'm going to turn around this school. It's not it's not an obvious answer in a lot of these communities to how to change these schools. So empowering and building up the principals, building up the full-time staff at these schools, bringing in community organizations, and also giving some resources and art supplies and musical instruments to each of these schools. And then, as you mentioned, Booz Allen Hamilton is doing a pro bono 2-year educational impact study for us, where they're bringing in a field of advisors, research advisors, and we'll be tracking these schools both in how these 6 schools do compared to comparable 6 schools that are not using the arts as part of their strategy, and then within each school how these schools are progressing and what strategies are working.
Chancellor Henderson, do you think that that kind of evidence, so to speak, when you have a Booz Allen Hamilton study, can lend the political will? Because, I mean, you experienced it, you grew up with it, you said you understand the viability of it personally, but given all the challenges that the teachers that you have, face, I mean, and I've been in so many meetings where a teacher says, I'd love to, but there's just no way because of the X, Y, and Z,
Yep.
and some of it's money, but often it's simply, it can be test score pressures or, just can't fit it in, essentially. So that is the evidence important in that way? Would that help you?
So I think the evidence is somewhat important, right? There are people who make decisions simply based on what these kinds of evaluations say, and so for them, absolutely important. But I think more important is what happens at the school and how parents and teachers and the community feel about what's happening at that school and see progress. When I think about why schools fail, there are 4 main issues for me, and they're all people issues to some extent. Schools usually fail because they don't have the right leadership. Leaders who don't have a vision or who don't know how to implement or what have you, don't know how to motivate people or whatever. Schools fail because students are not motivated or are far behind and don't have the tools and resources that they need. They fail because teachers don't have the capability or skills that they need or don't have the motivation that they need. And they fail because parents and the community don't provide the kind of partnership and support that we need to do this work together. And while other people might not feel like this turnaround in the arts initiative is an obvious answer, it is so obvious for me because it actually addresses those 4 things, right? It ensures, in fact, this couldn't go forward unless, you heard Rachel say, we looked for really good leaders who get this, who understand this, and who are able to manage staff and implement well and whatnot. I think when we think about teacher motivation and teacher capabilities, there are professional development opportunities that come with this grant where our teachers will be able to partner with artists from Wolf Trap and the Kennedy Center. And we do some of that now, but this will actually provide time and resources that will allow them to dig deep into professional development to change their practice. And we know that when people are doing things that they like, they do things well, right? So when teachers have the opportunity to tap into their creative tendencies, then they bring that joy and that effectiveness to their students. We know for sure that for many of our students, the only reason they come to school is because they get an opportunity to flex whatever muscle it is that they have, their dance muscle or their, singing muscle or what have you. And if we can create places where we honestly believe that their talent is as important as their test scores, you start to see children who previously misbehaved now behaving because they want to participate, right? And then it provides an opportunity for the parents and the community to engage. Parents might not come to a PTA meeting, but they will always come see their child perform. And you get parents into a school in a very different way, not because you want to tell them what Johnny is not doing, because even though Johnny might be a knucklehead in class, Johnny has a tremendous talent that we are now showcasing. And when you have some positive reinforcement about even a struggling student, you are willing to engage as a parent in a different way. The community then supports the school, brings resources, talent in a very different way. And so I think that that the arts as a turnaround strategy is actually incredibly brilliant, and I'm sort of amazed at why people don't think that this is like a thing and not fundamental. But it doesn't just happen at one school. In fact, we know and believe that kids, not just at Savoy, but all across the district, need to be exposed and engaged in the arts. And so we are, Sarah Madera is my Director of Arts Partnerships, and in fact, we, in tight budgetary times where we could have been cutting things, I added a Director of Arts Partnerships, because if you don't have somebody who is intentional about carrying out the work, then it gets lost. So we've made that commitment, and we've engaged with about 30 community partners in a wholesale district-wide arts planning process that we expect to complete by January of 2013, so that as we move into the budgetary season for next year, we know what the priorities are in getting us from where we are in doing some arts very well in some places to ensuring that as many of our students as possible get the kinds of opportunities that we know they deserve and will thrive in addition to what's happening at Savoy.
Kaya, can I ask you just a little bit how you think about this balance between sort of district positions, art specialists? I know that you and Michelle put in place a framework to guarantee sort of a baseline of that, which not all districts in the country have. And so how you think about sort of, what can be outsourced and what can't be outsourced, and what's sort of the core responsibility of the district and what you really need community partners for in this area?
Yeah, so there's not really a science to it. I feel like one of the prerogatives of being the chancellor is you just do the things that are important to you, right? And this is important to me. And so, while for other people, 10 more of something might have been important, for me, thinking critically about the arts across the district is a priority. And I'll give you an example. We actually engaged in a similar planning process with some of our partners at WPAS, right? What would it take to really scale and have a full-out, robust arts program at every single school? And our arts and music content specialists at the district sat down with the folks at WPAS, came up with a plan. It had a pretty hefty price tag on it, and so we weren't able to implement fully, but we were able to take those recommendations as a set of first steps. But relying on partners to drive that work is, I think, doesn't reflect a real priority. And so the district has got to put some skin in the game to say this is important to us, because I think, as I said, our partners have carried this work for a really long time. We're in situations where our arts partners are facing the same kinds of budget cuts that we are. And so I can't rely on them to continue to bring me the same level of service when some of them don't have a roof over their heads, right? And so, for example, in a completely unrelated situation, we have Ward 5, which is one of the neighborhoods here in the district, which doesn't have a standalone middle school. It has all pre-K to 8s. And we were in conversations with the Ward 5 community about what they wanted to see in a standalone middle school. And one of the things that they wanted to see was a significant arts program. And as we were looking at spaces to house this new sort of middle school in Ward 5, one of the ideas that we came up with, we have a building that holds probably 900 kids, Hamilton, which, you know, we weren't thinking we'd have a 900 student middle school, but we thought we'd probably have a 450 student middle school. And if we had the money to modernize the facility, why not modernize it so that half of it is around performance space and office space for our arts partners, so that they could actually move in with us, right? Because we have a number of underutilized buildings at the same time that we have partners who deliver services in our schools. Why not get married? Why not live together? And so as we think about, you know, some of the facilities issues that we have, I had one of our key arts partners is Life Pieces to Masterpieces, and they came to me this past summer, and they said, you know, we're losing our space. And I said, great, here are all of our underutilized buildings, and they are now housed at Drew Elementary School, and including doing their work citywide, they have a very extensive partnership with Drew. I think we have to be flexible in thinking about not just you know, at every opportunity, with every decision that I make, if this is a priority for me, I'm thinking about how to maximize the opportunity.
Interesting. You know, two things that you said really strike a chord with me, which is the power of all of this to create participation on so many different levels, whether it's from the children themselves or from the parents, you know, asking different things of them, and the arts uniquely create that participation to the point where you're actually matchmaking, you know, in a housing way, which is just, you know, really revolutionary when you think about the challenges facing both sectors, you know, to be able to do that. And the other thing I would say is that the idea that you hired, you created a post for coordination, essentially, with the partners, is from the arts practitioner point of view, what's been missing all along. That there's been this willingness to do stuff, but nobody coordinating it, essentially. I mean, there's so many examples I have of it, but I'll give you the one that I come from myself, is that as a dancer, I danced in 1,000 gigs. You know, I'd go for a weekend, I'd dance twice, and I'd go home, and no one ever asked me to go to a school. I mean, never, never. And I can tell you that I always would have said yes. Yeah. It would have been no-brainer. I would have been like, all right, I'll leave at noon, and I'll go from 9 to 10:30 to a school. That's fine. And so, you know, that's one of the things that I've been working on privately and also through Aspen Institute Arts Program, is that intersection. How do you create that intersection? So that's what you're doing, essentially, by having that coordinative person, which is not obvious somehow, but it is. And when you think about it, it's like, well, how are we going to get it done? You know, what I wanted to do before we're going to go to question and answers in a minute is the Institute, Summer Institute is going to take place at the Y campus, and Ross Wiener has partnered with Rachel and the President's Committee to create this opportunity, which is really about giving strategies, right? I mean, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, so we do lots of workshops, some over the summer and through the school year, mostly with system leaders and policymakers around, as Rachel mentioned, sort of the hard reform agenda. So first, I just want to thank Rachel for including us and for your leadership on this, because this seems like a natural for the Aspen Institute to be involved in, to really try and integrate the sort of reform agenda and the arts and just that broader look at what do kids need for great education. So we're going to bring folks together, school leadership teams, along with the Kennedy Center, Arts Integration, some of the leaders in Arts Integration, and really facilitate a meeting that gives people a chance to do, first, to learn about some best practice, to have some time with their team to do some strategic planning, but also to try and build a community and a fellowship among these schools that are trying to do this in somewhat different contexts, but have lots of similarities, and I think can really help each other with how to be smart and strategic about the work. And the thing that I think I'm most excited about is the opportunity in the work with them to really think about how do we identify the opportunities where there's that deep integration of the arts into the improvement agenda and the instructional agenda at the school, so that this is more durable than just a grant or a project, but actually provides images for people of what it looks like really to deeply integrate the arts there's a statement that Rachel made when they were releasing that big report about the value of arts integration, and the statement was, it's a wrench, not a flower. And I think, it just speaks to that. And I'm actually looking forward to that opportunity to dig more deeply into this and really give people images of what is the leverage you get from arts to really just improve the whole program that kids are involved in. So I'm excited to be involved in it.
Before we go to questions, I just want to, I'm such a girl, but I just want to tell you a story. We got back, I was in our Bridgeport school, Roosevelt Elementary, last week, and I met a young 6th grader. Now, Bridgeport, Roosevelt Elementary was the lowest performing school in the state of Connecticut for 2 years. And I was in a very difficult neighborhood. Bridgeport is a community that's definitely had its challenges. And in 2009, they decided to close the school. And so they decided to close the school, and in the context of a hearing to sort of announce this to the community, over 200 parents and grandparents and legal guardians showed up and protested this and said, you can't close the school. It may be a terrible school, but it's the only point of stability in our children's lives. It's the only point of reference for our community. Because if they'd closed the school, they would have just bused the children to schools in different communities. And so the district decided to sort of give it one last shot, brought in a new principal, Tanya Kelly, who had previously been the director of performing arts at the district level in Bridgeport, got a SIG grant for it, and it's now the first year of trying to reinvent itself. And in that context, Tanya Kelly, who I hope you meet sometime, reminds me a little bit of you in a different way, decided that she was going to do a musical. The school hasn't had a band program for 17 years. She brought in a music instructor, and they now have a band program. And they were going to do a musical, and she decided to do The Wiz. So when we first visited the school for our site selection process, it was right after auditions. And I don't, our children go to Eaton District School here, and they just did a school musical, and it was incredibly professional. This school didn't feel anything like that. It was sort of handwritten. Audition posters were still on the walls. They didn't have a drama teacher. And I walked around the school with Principal Kelly, and in every classroom we poked into, children were running up to her saying, Miss Kelly, I'm going to be a flying monkey, or, oh, Miss Kelly, I'm an understudy for the, woodman or whatever. And it was just, there was sort of this sense of energy. So it's been a very hard year for them. They thought they were going to get some resources from another high-performing school in a different city to bring in a director and some set designers, and all that kind of went away. And so Tanya Kelly has ended up directing the school musical at the same time as she's turning around the school, and has brought in all of her teachers. The school secretary, who's been there for 22 years, is playing Auntie M, who's this like a lovely older African-American woman, and then oddly Uncle Henry is being played by her math teacher, who's like a 22-year-old skinny TFA guy. So the whole school is involved, and I was looking for a child to interview. We were there with a video camera trying to get some assets from the school, and in the beginning of its process, and they said, you should interview Carolyn, who's the lead. She's Dorothy in The Wiz. So she's the 6th grader, and she came in, and she sat down, and she's got all this sass, and I interviewed her, and she was talking about how excited she is to be in The Wiz, and how hard it's been, but how, she's going to be fantastic, and everybody looks at her in the school like she's somebody, but she's got a lot of moxie, and she made some references to some doctor's appointments, and that she hadn't been there that much this year, but she was really proud that she'd learned all her lines, and it was a great interview. And then afterwards, the literacy coach in the school came up to me and said, I don't know if anybody told you, but Carolyn has brain cancer. She's in remission now, but it was a really hard year for her, and she was a struggling student before, and I've been working with her in literacy because her reading has really just suffered this year. She's done and last year she had to do a lot of doctor's appointments and things like that. And she said, in the last 6 months, her reading has just shot through the roof. She's memorized all of her lines. She's in like every scene, and she's worked so hard to memorize every single line. And she said, I know everybody here is all excited about the arts focus and everything, and I got to tell you, I didn't really get it. I think it's great that you guys want to do the arts, but I kind of thought I'd do the hard work. And she said, I'm so excited you guys are here, and I'm so excited for Principal Kelly's vision, because I get it. And so that was just like 4 days ago, and I'm all still verklempt. But I just wanted to share with you, sometimes we talk about data and we talk about schools and principals, but when you're there in the school and you see one of these faces, it just really, I think, makes us all proud about what we're doing, and so grateful for people like Kaya and Patrick Pope, who are on really the front lines of this.
Yeah, what you just pointed out again was a level of participation that she was able to improve and integrate into her curriculum, her schoolwork, into her literacy. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. It's very Aspen Institute. I mean, it is. No, yeah,
No, it's
I'll
very
tell you
President's
why. No, because the core of the Aspen Institute, to my mind, I'm sure I could be corrected by many people in these halls, but was, the leadership training that occurred by reading the classic text. And the killer of it all at the end of it is you stage Antigone. And that's when you participate fully. If you do the executive seminar, you do Antigone at the end. You read Confucius, you read Martin Luther King Jr., you do Antigone, and everybody suddenly has a different stake in it. They have skin in the game. That's exactly what it is, as she said. So speaking of participation, this is your chance to participate. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. I ask that you press the red button when you want to speak, and when you're done, press it again. We'll start with Ethelbert, please.
Yeah, maybe this is a good question coming after Rachel's comments. I wanted you to talk about the artists. We talk about the schools and the teachers and the children. What happens to the artists? Are we really concerned about how they might be transforming themselves? Do they create new work, after the experience, in terms of if they hadn't been in a school, would they not have written this story or composed this composition? Also, I'm looking at the fact that many artists are professionals. When we talk about the money that's in the arts, are we fighting for money for the artists to be paid for their coming into the schools?
So there's a researcher at the University of Chicago named Nick Rabkin who just put out a very well-received study on teaching artists, and was really the first kind of comprehensive look at who are they, how much do they work, how much do they get paid, do they want to be working more, do they want to be working less, are they still working artists, are they just doing this? I read this in the context of the work that we did around the report. We visited schools all over the country just to see what was working in schools, and met some amazing teaching artists. I should say we also met some amazing, arts teachers and music teachers, and it's really it's a rising tide that raises all ships. In the worst case scenario, no, teaching artists are asked to do too much for too little. They don't get enough pedagogy and training on how to work in a classroom and how to handle kids. They're plopped into classrooms as a planning period, so they go off and do things with kids while the real teachers go off and do their lessons plans for the other, and they don't get that much out of it. In a best case scenario, when teaching artists are really supported in schools and are allowed to form partnerships long term with classroom teachers and art specialists, and have the kind of training and pedagogy background that they need, they get the support from the community arts organizations like WPS and the Kennedy Center that uses really high quality teaching artists. It is a transformational experience for the artists. They generally say that it allows them to, it subsidizes their work as an artist in a very healthy way. They don't make a lot of money, but it allows them to then gig on the weekends or do their work on days that they're not working. It says it changes their art. They've said universally that it makes their art richer. It allows them to see things through new eyes. It empowers them and re-energizes them. It gives them a skill set and a standing in the community that many of them find very useful. And a lot of them in the survey, and I'd encourage you to look at it, said even if they were making a full-time salary at their primary art form, they wouldn't give this up because it was such a huge part of their life and their art. So I think that we will see in our schools, and our schools are lucky to have access to some really quality partners, that the teaching artists will not only enrich the schools but be enriched by their experience.
Yeah, I would add to that the schools that I've worked in over the last years, that's exactly what's usually borne out in that best case scenario, where a teaching artist from the National Dance Institute will actually be helping a young TFA teacher with classroom management through the arts, essentially. And I've watched it happen where I go back to the school without the teaching artist, and the teacher is using NDI techniques to gain students' attention and their participation. And conversely, the teaching artist actually learns a lot about themselves by having to vocalize in ways that they don't normally do in their, in the chosen field, in the core competency, it's very different to have to explain it to a sixth grader. And it's huge.
I want to also take the opportunity to point out another community partner, which is the DC Commission for Arts and Humanities. The DC Collaborative for the Arts and Humanities. This is a conglomeration of arts organizations in the city, and they do nifty things like they provide buses for our kids to go on field trips to all kinds of arts organizations, and they produce a catalog so that literally all a teacher has to do is dial up, the organization, and they can arrange field trips that are focused on the arts. But they do something that I actually think is far more important than that, and that is they train performing artists in the art standards and in the regular literacy standards and math standards, so that when our artists are in our classrooms, they understand the work that we are doing. They understand how to customize their work to integrate with the hardcore academic work that we are doing. And so while people think about partnerships just being bringing the arts to schools, this is an incredibly important capacity building partnership for us. And so I wanted to take a moment to shout them out.
Nice. Okay. Please, Alina.
Hi, I'm Aletta Margolis with Center for Inspired Teaching, and I love hearing about the work that's going on, and there's no question that bridging the creativity gap is the first step in bridging the achievement gap. And you talked about the classroom management changes, you talked about Carolyn and her reading. I'm wondering, is there a component of this program where you are deliberately striving to change what happens for kids all day long in math class and reading class, not only when they're engaged in arts, but change the teaching they experience in all of their classes so that it's more engaging and the motivation is improved, as you talked about?
Absolutely. And, we fully, at the committee, support the arts as a core academic subject with its own sequential standards-based instruction. Where you tend to see the most dramatic gains in these kind of schools is in arts integration. When you bring the arts strategies into other classrooms, math, ELA, specifically into specific demographics like children with special needs or ELL learners, and you infuse the arts in the way that they're learning those other subjects, that's when you really see, the holy grail, for better or worse, these test scores really raised to the roof. There was 2 years ago, there was a study done in Maryland, the AIMS program, which took 6 schools with comparable student demographics, and 3 were control schools, and 3 were these pilot schools where they did a 3-year arts integration curriculum in reading and math. And they saw that at the end of 3 years, the lowest proficiency learners in the 3 pilot schools had raised their math scores by 17% and their reading scores by 18% or 19%. And in the control schools, those scores had actually gone down by an average of about 4.5%. So in our program, arts integration, and interestingly, I don't want to take up too much time, but in many of the schools that we're going into, that's the piece that's sort of being left on the table a little bit. People get a great band program as a way to motivate kids, and people get a great arts program as a way to bring in parents and engage students. But how to create time and space and opportunity for their classroom teachers to collaborate with teaching artists and their art specialists to infuse that, that's when you see the magic happen. That's when the whole school feels differently when you walk through the school, and every classroom has the boards outside that have some fantastic visual piece that's connecting geometry to Turkish mosaics, or building Calder mobiles to demonstrate linear equations. That's when you see the real amazing things happen.
Hi, I'm Angela Hahn. I'm with the Pearson Foundation. Ross touched a little bit on how this work is going to help continue, how this work is going to continue beyond the initial couple of years of the initiative with Just 8 Schools. I'm curious to know, though, how, kind of in an ideal world, what you would love to see happen next. Do you want to expand to 200 schools? Do you want to see something else happen?
Such a good question. This whole process has been a little bit like flying a plane while you're building it. As I said, a year ago we came out with our report. It was about really 9 months from when we came out with our report to when we launched this program, putting all the funding and the pieces together and the partners, and we had a tremendous amount of ahead of momentum going in. So right now we're really focused on implementation and storytelling, both from data and from elevating the stories of these principles. I don't think that every school in the country should be an arts integration school in the way, with the rigor and depth that Patrick is doing it or some of our other principals are doing it. I do think that every school in the country will do better if they have an effective and integrated arts component to their school than if they don't. And so two questions for me coming, I think, from the committee coming out of this project are, is there a way to scale this particular project, and with government support, and that's happened in other programs the President's Committee has done, where they've done a pilot program and then it's gotten absorbed by an agency or department who took it on, or as a nonprofit or in the private sector, excuse me. So is there a way to scale this program and specifically support these kind of schools who are trying to use these kind of strategies in a holistic way? And how can we use the examples of these schools and this data to give the courage of their convictions to districts and principals across the country who want to be using the arts more proactively to tackle some of their challenges, but nobody has their back. They'll get laughed out of their school board meeting or their superintendent or their state legislature when they go in asking for more resources for arts teachers instead of literacy coaches. So how can we use this platform? How can we not only scale this program, I think is something we're proactively not thinking of for the next year, but what we are very much thinking of is how can this not be one other little pilot project that is helpful to 8 schools and the arts community is excited about and then goes away. But how can we use it to give both practices and support to other folks on a local level who want to do this in their schools?
Yeah, and it's the example part that, and it also goes to the artists themselves as well. So artists around the country, we're hoping very much that artists see, the adoptive process of a school, and that becomes in itself something that is replicable in many different ways. The focus of my program next year at Aspen Institute is about citizen artists. It's about artists who do more than simply excel in their field. This is a perfect example of how you can make a contribution, and this will show, as already is borne out, frankly, by the emails I got that morning when it was announced. Everybody wanted to know what the best way to do it is. Can you show us? How do we integrate? How do we coordinate? And the idea that, the example of someone like Chancellor Henderson, who just gets it totally, and this is another way, another strategy, actually, a very specific one, but it's another one that she's looking at, is an example again. So how do we get to scale? I mean, I do want it at every school, but we'll negotiate.
Can I just jump in on what I want as a district leader? So what I hope to happen is that, first of all, as Rachel said, we now have, when this is successful, we now have political cover and permission to pursue what we really believe is important for student achievement, right? And right now, in this era of incredible accountability, I think, the pendulum swung from sort of no accountability and let's hope it all works out right to uber accountability, and I'm hoping that we can find our way to the middle, and I think that this is a helpful way to find our way to the middle. It's not prescriptive in a way that says you have to do X, Y, Z, and Q. You have to close a school, or you have to charterize it, or you have to whatever in order for it to be successful. It actually produces a new avenue for school turnaround. So I think that if Patrick is successful, while again, not every school will be an arts turnaround school, I think we'll have more opportunities to create those kinds of situations. I also think that even for the schools that are not going to be arts turnaround schools, we have a tremendous opportunity in that everybody in the country, for the most part, is adopting the Common Core standards. That means that teachers have to relearn how they are doing what they are doing, right? And while they are in a place of being open to rethinking their practice, we can ensure that they are not just rethinking how they're going to integrate the Common Core standards, but how they are going to integrate art into what they are doing. So, for example, at DC Public Schools, we have moved forward with a kindergarten through 12th grade implementation of the Common Core literacy standards across 4 different subject areas. We have a standardized curriculum now for the first time in a little while, and Patrick's school is going to actually create lessons and units and whatnot that is aligned to my standardized curriculum, but that is integrated with that integrates the arts. And I'm going to be able to take those lesson plans or units and share them with other professionals who, even if your entire school doesn't want to be an arts school, if there's a teacher who has a particular predisposition, I can put these resources online. I can use Patrick's administrative staff and teachers to become professional developers for people who want to do this. We can create professional learning communities of folks who want to learn how to do this, even if your entire school is not pursuing this as a strategy. And so I think that the effects, my bet is I'm going to support him to the hilt because I'm going to get paid in spades, right? It's not just going to be what he creates for Savoy, but it's going to be simple things, right? So scheduling, for example, lots of times principals are stymied by ensuring that they are able to meet all of the mandates within a, random set of minutes that we are required to adhere to. And Patrick is going to be completely creative in terms of how he schedules, and that's going to then provide a template and permission for other principals to think differently about how they schedule. And so my expectation is that the learnings that we get from this concentrated pilot opportunity will have lessons that we can then spread across the district in really meaningful ways.
Yeah, I want to just make one point that you pointed out that I thought was so interesting. As we went across the country and we were visiting exclusively these sort of failing schools, underperforming schools, there's really two different approaches that districts are taking to these schools. And one is your school is underperforming and is marked as one of these turnaround schools. So we're going to get more hands-on. We're going to be more involved. We're going to put more restrictions on you and try and get more involved in what you're doing day to day. And then there's other principals who've said, all right, so what I'm going to do for my failing schools is other districts, handpick my superstar principals, and then I'm going to be the linebacker. I'm going to give you as much autonomy and as much cover as I can to actually be free of some of the constraints that may be imposed on other schools so that you can actually innovate, because this school needs innovation. It's not, and so the districts that we really tried to prioritize were districts where the leadership was going towards giving more autonomy and more flexibility to these schools as opposed to less. But it's really a dichotomy. You really see them doing one or the other in a way that's interesting.
Okay, well, that's going to have to be all for today, but I want to thank Chancellor Henderson and Rachel for being here, and Principal Pope, wishing you great success turning around through the arts, and I look forward to visiting your school. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.